from Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, for the last generation,
I'm
you have a choice.
the Republican
I
candidate
did
for
not
governor.
have sexual relations with
I
that
realized
woman.
that this is something
Miss
he
Lewinsky.
is
We're not going to
inherent.
be able to solve our problems if we get distracted by sideshows and carnival barkers.
One Republican, one Democrat, and you discuss the issues that matter in today's local, state, national, and global politics. Hosted by Steve Hickson with co-hosts John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey. This is Backfire.
Good morning, Cleveland. Welcome to Whoop Radio right here at Village Green Town Center, downtown Cleveland, Tennessee. Hey, this morning we've got our normal co-host, John Stanberry, with us. Mr. Franklin Chansey had to bail out on us this morning. Seems like he knows when the hot seat's going to get hotter, John, and he heads out. But
he probably just has to earn a living like all of us do.
Yeah, I'd say so. Anyway, we have a special guest, Eric Armstrong, an attorney here in town. Welcome to our show, Eric.
Thanks for having me here.
All right.
I've been here once before, and it was invigorating. Let's put it that way.
Eric's mother is Mary Frances Armstrong, who was heading up the Democratic Party here for several years. And what else was her titles around town?
Well, I guess she was chairman of the Bradley County Election Commission for more years than I really know. And she retired from that, gosh, it seems like maybe 4 years ago maybe.
Yeah.
And she's been enjoying the time off since then from politics.
I see her walking up and down
Yep.
Ocoee a lot.
Yep.
Let me say
do.
something about that. That was a tough time for the Democratic Party. The Republicans took control of the House and the Senate first time in about 140-something years, and there was a little dispute over when those county election commissions would turn over. And some in Nashville in the Democratic Party were talking about going to court and trying to hold on to those seats. I want everybody to know Mary Frances Armstrong got up at a Tennessee Democratic Party meeting and told them it's the wrong thing to do. The system works. The Republicans won. They're entitled to these chairmanships, and I'll be resigning my chairmanship. That is a decent, honorable, honest thing to do, and I want everybody to know how decent and good Miss Armstrong was about that.
Wow. Now, that's from John Stanberry.
Now, let's get started. Now that my guard's down.
Oh, golly.
Well, I mean
Thanks,
that
John.
sincerely.
In all seriousness, and that's not the first time John's told me that,
Yeah.
and I appreciate him saying that too. It's
it was a
heartfelt.
decent, honest thing to do.
And that's exactly what John told me around the time it happened before, when he and I were talking about it. And I really appreciate you saying that, John.
All right. Let's talk about sales tax here locally. I see there's a big hoopla in the paper about the our sales tax again. You know, it's been we've sued ourselves from one side, and then we turned around and appealed it and sued ourselves from the other side, and now we're suing ourselves from the other side. And I'm talking about the county government versus the city government. We kind of seem like we're just keep suing each other back and forth over the same issue. It's over the sales tax dispute that's been going on since what, 2008?
Long time.
Yeah, something like that. You know, I don't know. I was reading an article about it, and of course Jimmy Logan's representing the county side in this appellate court case right now. And there's an attorney out of Chattanooga, I think, that's handling the city side of this. I don't have his name handy, but you know, I was reading their arguments back and forth, and I think the bottom line is, was the tax meant to go on forever? When it was voted on, was it meant to go on forever? Or is this something that could have been stopped? I remember when the city was going to put this sales tax on the agenda to be voted on. The county, oh no, they weren't going to do that, and I think they were afraid it wouldn't pass. And when the city put it on there, it did pass. So there was the discrepancy from the time it passed until the Democrats later on decided, well, if the city can do it, we can do it. So they turned around and put it out
Not
for
the
a vote.
Democrats, the county commission.
I'm sorry. Excuse me.
Yeah, careful
The
now.
county commission decided, thank you, John, for keeping me straight here.
Yeah.
Decided that they would put it out for a vote, and sure enough, it passed what, a year
Well,
later?
the county commission kind of had to do that because if not, the bulk of the residents live in the county. The bulk of the sales take place in the city. So they felt like once the city passed it, they had to get some of that share back for the county residents.
Yeah, but they were against it.
They were hoping it wouldn't pass in the first place.
Right.
And it passed with an extremely low voter turnout.
Right. So the discrepancies are that basically the city voted to do this and it passed. Then probably a year later?
Oh no,
8 months later?
It was in that same year.
Well, 8 months later. I mean, it was pretty good while. And then I guess by the time everything was implemented, there's probably 8 months worth of taxes that the city had collected that they said was basically their taxes because the county wasn't involved in it during that period of time. Now then, it goes back to 1967 or something where some kind of a bill was passed. And let me see if I can pull my notes out here. And now the argument is that it was supposed to, the code, let's see, did the city or the county amend the 1967 contract to extend its sales tax distribution formula to the 1982 local option sales tax? If not, the proceeds of the 82 sales tax increase should have been divided pursuant to the Tennessee code rather than the formula per the 1967 contract. I don't know where this thing is going, this case is going. It's really hard to follow. It's hard to understand.
Here's my problem. I think it's easy to understand if you boil it down to the basics. The basics is that the problem is the city government and the county government lose sight of who they work for. Right. They work for the taxpayer. It's all the taxpayers' money. And this idea that we're fighting over who gets it, it's our money. Well, and if the city spends it, it's our money. If the county spends it, and to spend our money fighting each other over our money is ridiculous.
I agree. Totally agree with that. And somehow they should have flipped a coin or done something. And
well, it's ego and power more than anything. Yeah. Hey, it's our money. No, it's our money.
Yeah.
You know, that's what this is about. It's two kids fighting in the sandbox over a plastic toy. Only we're paying for the plastic toy.
Well, is part of it right now the city saying that if it's not changed, this will go on forever? Is this a forever law?
Well, part of the problem probably is that the city, when the county canceled the fire contract, lost about $1.5 million a year. And they don't want to lay anybody off, so they're scrapping for every dime they can get.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Was the fire contract forever? I mean, no, it wasn't forever. So now why are we trying to say this one in 1967 was forever? So I don't know. It's hard to follow, hard to understand.
It's just a shame that it's always about power and control. It's not really about how do we help the people the most.
I think that's the nature. I think that's really one of the big problems with implementing a tax, any kind of a new tax, is unfortunately, I think some local governments, I'm not going to say necessarily in this particular case it's true of Bradley County, but you open an opportunity, and this may sound like a libertarian or a Republican view, but no one wants to see their tax dollars misspent or just be hoarded and then just try to imagine reasons to spend those dollars. And that sounds like what we may be looking at here by virtue of the fact that this contract, this fire contract, wasn't renewed. Now we have extra money, and what are we going to do with it? And no one wants to. I guess when you're used to having those revenue streams opened up already, no one wants to close those revenue streams, and that's what I think the fight is really about here. That's a fancy way of saying what John said earlier, and that is we want our money. They think it's their money, but it really isn't their money. It's taxpayer dollars, and how they spend it is what's important here.
And you're not going to get any argument out of me on that one. So,
like I say, I may sound like I'm taking I tend to agree with that. It's unfortunate.
Well, let me ask you something, Eric. Do you think the city and the county are saving money by having two fire departments?
Of course not. I think that's an argument for consolidated government. It's been the argument. If it's why have two. Why have a city and county school system? Why have a city and county fire department? Why have two of anything? It's also not just it may be that you need the resources to create, but it seems like it's not a very efficient way to do business, in my opinion.
You know, there's multiple places to confuse the public. For example, you'll hear people talk about, well, we need parity between the county and the city. Well, Dwayne Bunch said something to me a few years ago that made a lot of sense, and it was so simple I hadn't thought about it either. He said, why do you pay city taxes? You know, you pay extra city taxes to have extra services. So this whole argument, sometimes you'll hear county people make, hey, we need parity with the city. We don't have tax parity with the city. You can't have parity in the money you spend unless you have parity in the money you tax. Now, do you want to raise taxes in the county to the same level that they are in the city? And if you do that, why do you need a city? You know, matter of fact, by state charter, like for the schools, for example, all you have to do to have a consolidated school system is the city turns their charter in. City schools turn their charter in. County schools, by state law, are required to educate all the children.
You know, you brought up schools, and it was interesting. I'm trying to find, there was a small article in the paper, and it was talking about, here it is, I think, suggestions by county resident Bill Carroll on how to make safer schools more affordably. Carroll said using the same school design for each school in the future would cut down on architectural costs. He also suggested using a steel and concrete concept hut model. This model would withstand any tornado that may come through Cleveland, he said. Carroll presented copies of the idea to the board. The design I have illustrated will save us billions over the years. Also, our children will learn the same as if they were in school. We now have, Carroll said. We would save money to pay our teachers better salaries. And Commissioner Elkins told Carroll that these decisions are made by the Bradley County School Board of Education, not the county commission.
That's true.
Well,
Lisa's argued for years when she was chairman of the Education Committee that we should be using the same design. If you build Waterville School and you decide that it's an excellent design, then why in the world would you spend $200,000 to a design firm to design another one? Plus, you actually build the second and the third and the fourth edition of those schools cheaper each time because you figure out what worked in the first design, what didn't work, you change some of that. I tell you, the most disgusting thing that she kind of came across was when we built the Bradley County Justice Center. There is a state standard for prisons. So when you put out a call for design firms, you say design a justice center to meet the state standard. There is no state standard for schools. Now think about that.
For jails.
No, there is not one for schools.
There is for jails, though.
So there is. We have a state standard for jails, but not a state standard for schools. And the point of a state standard is like Mayfield School, for example, second most expensive per square foot school in the country.
But it won some awards.
Well, I'm so happy. Did that educate any children? The problem with that is
someday.
If you had a state minimum standard, then all apples would be equal and you could have all the designs meet the state minimum standard. And then if the community said, we want a terrazzo floor, we want 50-foot high hallways, you could say, how much more is that going to cost, and are we willing to pay that extra cost? But the way it is now, the school board comes with, in a lot of cases, a Cadillac design, and then if you say you think that's too much, they go, well, you hate children. You don't want to help educate the child. No, I just don't think a terrazzo floor educates my child. I think a good teacher, well paid in the classroom with good support, educates my child.
You know, I definitely think that a standard school design, maybe 3 different designs that they could pick from to fit different areas or something, maybe something on a flat lot, something on the side of a hill, whatever they come up with.
Well, worse than that, for years, the company that the county and the city was using, for example, Walker Valley, we paid for that design as a brand new school. Guess what? There's 3 or 4 of those all over the place.
Yeah.
It was not a brand new design, but we paid a full price for a brand new design.
I remember when I was a kid, I was very fortunate that I went to 2 brand new schools here in Cleveland. One of them was George R. Stewart School when it was built. And the next one was Cleveland High School when it was built. Both of those schools have been added on to and added on to and added on to. You know, the George R. Stewart School was, when it was built, was very, very modern looking, I think, with their little round dome gym and so forth, and very high tech. I think they've had some problems with it, I'm not sure, but anyway, the school was laid out in a way that it could be added onto as growth was needed. And, I think that's another thing about the school system. If we had a standard in some kind of designs and so forth, basically you can put a school in. If you need one for 500 students or 1,000 students, you can have that. And as growth comes, just like Walker Valley right now, Walker Valley's busting at the seams already. Mayfield School, hey, it was busting at the seams probably the year after they built
it. Are you talking about the seams in the floor where the sinkholes are, or
both?
Literally.
Both.
I tell you, I have a little hard time with that, though, Steve. When I went to Bradley High School, there were 2,900 students at Bradley High School.
Yeah.
Now, I know everybody talks about smaller class sizes, but you know what? Miss Fitzgerald taught me pretty good in a class of, I think we had 33 or 4 people in her class. It's just hard for me to think about how well I felt like the school functioned with 2,900, and now I think it's got 1,600, and they're claiming it's overcrowded. Plus, they've added a whole new building wing onto it.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get into adding the new wings to our schools. I think there's competition between science wings and so forth going on right now. But anyway, I think the standard design is something that needs to be looked into. Mr. Carroll made a good point to the commission. Of course, the commission stated that it was the Board of Education's decision.
It is.
I know that. But I'm not sure that it totally is when it comes to the funding for these things.
Well, but I mean, that's really the pull. I know that at one point in some of the contentious negotiations Lisa and the Education Committee were involved in when she was on, at one point they made a comment. Some of the school board members said, well, if it was up to us, we'd just raise taxes to pay for this. Mm-hmm. And she very quickly said, that'll be fine. I'll be glad to take that recommendation to our state representatives, and they'll put a private act together, and you can have taxing authority. Well, the director of schools at the time real quick jumped up and went, no, we don't want that.
Yeah.
So the school board, in a way, enjoys a real big club. We get to ask for this money. We don't have any responsibility for taking the burden of the public being mad at us over the taxes that it requires. And if you say no to us, we're going to claim you don't support teachers.
Anyway, we can talk about this all day, so we'll keep moving. Next thing, locally. Locally is, let's talk about the intersection up there at 25th and Ocoee. The decision was recently made from the city government to turn this back over to the state and let them figure it out. Now, I'm sure there was a lot of hoopla to get somebody in there to fix that intersection real quick, and then all of a sudden there's some feathers got ruffled, and all of a sudden city council turned around and said, let's let the state figure this out. So basically, it's gone back into the state hands, a 7-0 vote from city council, and now it's amongst work orders of 95 other counties to get something done, which basically I think it's probably a doomsday deal for that intersection. I'm not sure what could be done to that intersection. I've got friends that own property there and so forth. And
25th and Ocoee, right?
Yeah.
Probably one of the, I think I read somewhere that 25th and Keith is one of the busiest intersections in the entire state. So 25th and Ocoee is just another major block up. Mm-hmm. I can understand why they would want to wash their hands of it and put it over into the state's kitty, but we're not going to see anything done on that in a long time.
No.
I'm not counting on anything happening on that.
Well, I'm not sure people wanted that. Here was the problem. When you start, just like we were talking a minute ago about schools and funding, and, funding's important, but there's a big argument of that it's not that there's not enough money out there, it's how that money's divided up. So when you look at that plan and you say, hey, if you'll just put $8 million into it, which I believe was around what I think the state was going to put in, I think we were going to have to put in $2 or $3 million in on it. We can cut your wait at that intersection in 10 years from 184 seconds, or from 284 seconds to 184 seconds. You're talking about less than a minute and a half extra wait time for what, $10 million? Is it really a good expenditure of public money?
The situation is probably going to change in the next few months anyway, because that's one of the faster growing areas in Bradley County. As you go up to the bypass, you've got all this growth, you've got businesses that are coming up that way. What the situation is now is going to be totally different, I think, in less than a year.
Yeah.
And some of this, too, was the way the state government, the way any government handles these things. For example, they said, oh, well, we're going to buy right-of-ways. One of these people up there that has a business, they were going to be 3 feet from his front door. Now, they weren't going to buy his business. They weren't going to buy his building. They said, oh, we're not getting your building. No, you're only, my customers can't step out the front door without getting run over. But by all means, you haven't hurt my business. That's a problem. That's just an unrealistic, unfair thing for the state to do.
I think you had a good idea, John. Several weeks ago, we talked about this a little bit, and I think your suggestion was to widen Key Street.
Well, they've got multiple problems. For years, they've been taking lights down off of Ocoee. When you take lights down, no matter how wide the street is, when you take the lights down, you move more traffic onto that street because people don't like the lights. Right. Well, you've got a 4-lane down on Keith Street with a bunch of lights on it. You've taken lights off of Ocoee, so you've actually shifted traffic over to Ocoee. Why not put some lights back up on Ocoee if you want, but at the very least, take that median out of Keith Street and make it 6 lanes and get those lights synchronized to where people can actually move from one side of town to the other in a reasonable fashion. Right.
I think I've been harping on this Michigan Avenue Road being widened all the way down to Paul Huff to take some of the burden off. Seems like I've seen something going on with that here recently. They've talked about doing this, so I hope that happens. I wish that'd be their push TDOT over there, but that's not a federal road, though, or state road.
Of course, you do understand, too, though, that the city owns some of the problems here, too, because they always do what's politically expedient. The state came in and built 25th Street as a bypass and told the city not to commercialize it, not to allow it to have curb cuts, not to allow commercial business to go in, because they built that to funnel traffic. Right. What did the city do? They let it commercialize. So then the state comes in and says, okay, we'll build Paul Huff, but don't commercialize it because we need it as a throughway for traffic to move. What did the city do? They agreed to it, but then within a year or two, we're building big box stores, we're doing all kinds of cut. Amazingly, state fences that we were told in the rezoning couldn't be taken down have amazingly been able to be taken down. So now they're talking about a third connector on farther out Mouse Creek for another wing. So some of this, if the city would stick to its commitments, and if they say they're not going to commercialize something and allow it to be a major traffic flow corridor, they should stick to their guns. So some of this they brought on themselves.
All right. Y'all want to talk about Big Bird a minute?
Sure.
I haven't watched Sesame Street in so long, I don't know how much I'm going to know.
I wish Franklin was here just to respond to Big Bird. One of the things about Big Bird, Mr. Obama's been using the Big Bird strategy here, talking about everything about Big Bird and nothing about the facts of what's happening right now and statistic information. But now then, he's got Big Bird people against him, and he's got AARP saying, don't use our name anymore. Big Bird people are saying don't use Big Bird anymore, and AARP saying don't use our name anymore. Well, that's pretty bad when a president gets scolded by two figures like this, I would think.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things going on. They're trying to. They've actually put out a TV commercial about effectively comparing Mitt Romney to Bernie Madoff to WorldCom guy, convicted felons, and throwing in the Big Bird thing. The problem with that is The president in the last couple of days has mentioned Big Bird in his speeches 8 times, I think Elmo 5 times, but not a word about a plan to employ more Americans. Not a word about the Libyan Benghazi attacks, where the first time in decades a U.S. ambassador was murdered. So, you know, it's funny when you go back and you see his quotes from 2008 where he said, if you don't have a record to run on, you build a campaign on little things.
Right.
And that's what he's doing. On top of the fact that Big Bird is worth about $380 million. It would be successful. It'll be around without government subsidies. And that was Mitt Romney's point. It wasn't about Big Bird. It was about,
PBS.
do we really want to borrow money from China to spend on things we don't have to do?
$444 million a year, I think, is given to PBS.
It's less than 1% of their budget.
And now the Democrats are making fun of it, saying it's less than 1% of the budget, and that's what Romney wants to talk about. But you know what?
It's an example of lots of other things.
That's exactly right. It's an example of some of the things that we need to start with. I don't know why you have public television or public radio. There's no need for
well, there
one.
was a need decades ago, but that's changed now. With cable TV, it's very different. Dora the Explorer is a wonderful program. It's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It doesn't get a dime of government money. It's not a PBS produced program. And yet somehow the private market was able to produce that wonderful educational show for our children. So the government doesn't have to do it, and we don't have the money to do it.
Right. Eric?
Well, I have a little bit different view on that. Last I remember, I think Big Bird wasn't even mentioned in the first place by President Obama in the debate. It was Governor Romney was the one that decided to even bring it up. And I feel like that what he did was, you all said that this is public education, or rather public television represents such a small drop in the bucket as to the overall budget anyway. And I think that that's been one of those hot button topics for a lot of conservatives anyway. I think that they love to hear people go after public TV, public television. We don't need to fund it anymore. I don't know why it's such a big issue for some of them that we need to do that, because it's such a small part of the budget in the first place. But I think it's important to remember, like I say, that this was something that Governor Romney chose to bring up. And it's really ironic in a funny way. And I suppose our minds have a way of distilling these things and trying to simplify things as far as how we remember them. But it seems like if you ask anyone who wants to try to remember something from that debate, other than just the general overall, there wasn't any kind of a magic moment where anybody said something that was memorable other than Big Bird. That was the only thing that was said from the debate that people can take away that was of a memorable nature. So therefore people started repeating this over and over, perhaps way in excess for the amount of content that's really to be represented by the whole issue in the first place. But I think that's why it keeps getting mentioned, because the general public, if you ask the person on the street, what was the one thing, if you had to distill one thing that you can remember from the debate, what was it, other than just the fact that your general impression is that Governor Romney won the debate?
I'm going to be the moderator here, John. Go ahead.
Well, I think, when you look at polls that show 67% of the people think that Mitt Romney just beat the pants off the president, I think that's probably the most memorable thing out of the debate. But, Eric, there's two problems here. Mitt Romney did not bring up Big Bird as some important substantive issue. He brought it up as simply an example that the public could understand about how the government wastes a lot of money. And how do you eat an elephant? You eat him one bite at a time. How do we run up a multi-trillion-dollar debt that this president has done every year he's been in office? You do it with tons of little things. And what Romney was talking about is doing away with as many of those things. What he said was, I'm not going to borrow money from China to pay for something if we don't need it. And that's going to be my test for all federal spending. And just to your point, we just finished talking about education. PBS gets, I think Steve said,
444 million is what I've heard.
Well, if you divide that by 50, folks, that's about $35 million per state. How many teachers would $35 million per state hire, Eric? If we cut out
every state's got a different revenue base. Every
no.
state's got
I'm talking
different
about the federal
populations.
government. If they took the money, the $450 million to PBS, and simply divided it up by 50 and sent it to the states for hiring teachers, how many teachers could be hired with that? Is that a minuscule idea?
You're comparing apples and oranges.
No, I'm saying cut it out and send it to the state.
Are you going to let me talk?
Sure.
Okay. Are you going to interrupt me before I get my answer out? You're comparing apples and oranges here. You're talking about funding for a TV program or television programming versus funding for education. It is apples and oranges is the way I see it. And to sit here and say and divide it up by 50 and say give all that money in equal amounts to each of the states, well, that's a spurious argument too, because each state has different populations, each state has different revenue bases, each state's tax their citizens in different ways. Tennessee, for example, is one of the lowest tax states in the nation, maybe the lowest, come to think of it, compared to other states. Maybe part of the reason for that is because we don't have an income tax, thank goodness. But I think it is specious to say that. I think there were more important things discussed or can be discussed besides this continuing debate that goes on, it seems like, every 4 years or every 2 years at least, over whether public television should be funded or not.
That's not the debate, Eric. The debate is we're
be.
borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar we spend from China. And that's what Mitt
That's
Romney
not true.
was. That is true.
10%. 10% is the actual number, John. That was another one of those things that he said in the debate the other night. The actual numbers are 10%, and they actually went down 10% over the last year.
This president has run up $1 trillion debt every year he's been in office.
Is the actual
What about our credit rating? Why is it being
Let me
affected?
finish my point.
Okay.
About China. John's raised the point. He's got everybody believing
But
40%. Let me finish my point.
10% is too much, Eric. I don't care if it's 10 or 15
okay, so
or 40.
it is 10%.
No, the numbers I've seen were 40. Now,
where'd you get your numbers?
But the point is, it doesn't matter whether it's 10 or 40. When you're spending
it does
more than
matter.
When you're spending more than you're taking in, you're spending too much. And the idea that you're going to argue over, you're telling me that, okay, I understand some states might need more. California is a bigger state. But you're telling me if we just divided it by 50 and Tennessee got a check from the federal government for $35 million for teachers, that would be an insult? That wouldn't be helpful?
No, it would be helpful, but you're comparing apples and
oranges.
oranges.
I'm not comparing anything. I'm saying if you don't spend it on PBS, even if you didn't give it back in a tax cut to the taxpayer, you could spend it on something better.
I don't know that you could, but again, you're comparing apples and oranges once again, John.
We're going to take a break in just a minute, but before we go, I want to ask Eric, I understand Franklin is not here today.
Yes.
Someone told me, now this is how rumor mill gets around, that since the last debate that he swung over and now he's thinking Republican.
I can neither confirm or deny that. Franklin and I have not talked that much in the last week, other than to say that I need somebody to fill in for me tomorrow morning. He didn't tell me anything about his thought process or anything.
Anyway, I'll let that rest right there. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson. We'll be right back after this.
WOOP, LP, Cleveland, Tennessee.